Wars do good for nobody, as they leave behind scars and unimaginable pain. Take the siege of Leningrad with an estimated 5.5 million casualties, or D-Day, where the Allies faced around 10,250 casualties in a success marked by great sacrifice. These are well-documented battles, but what about the bloodiest conflicts that didn't make the history books? Join us as we uncover the forgotten battles of American history, revealing those intense, overlooked moments that deserve their place in the annals of history. Battle of Cantigny, 1918. Imagine the early dawn of May 28, 1918, in the trenches of northern France. 4,000 American soldiers grip their rifles, their breaths visible in the cool morning air. The ground trembles with the thunder of artillery shells, and through the smoke, the fortified village of Cantigny looms. A stronghold manned by 1,200 seasoned German troops. This mission would test their resolve like never before. The Battle of Cantigny was the first major American offensive of World War I and a daunting mission for the American Expeditionary Forces. Led by Major General Robert Lee Bullard, the 28th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Division, known as the Big Red One, launched a meticulously planned assault with a rolling artillery barrage designed to neutralize formidable German defenses and supported by tanks and machine gun units.
Open warfare, of fighting out into what they called no man's land, wasn't working. The technology of the war had advanced so much with machine guns, artillery that could lob shells a mile. It became mostly a defensive war early on, and as a defensive war, you wanted to protect your troops, so the miles and miles of trenches were built.
The American troops advanced with steely determination. The fighting was fierce and unrelenting. Despite facing well-entrenched and battle-hardened German soldiers, the Americans pressed forward, capturing the village after intense close-quarters combat. They then had to hold Cantigny against multiple, determined German counterattacks. This hard-fought victory achieved by 4,000 American soldiers was a pivotal moment, marking the beginning of America's significant and impactful role in World War I. Battle of Attu, 1943. In the serene and remote island of Attu, in the Aleutians, a place where nature reigns supreme. Today it's a tranquil haven with rugged mountains, lush greenery, and the soothing sound of waves crashing against the shore. It may sound like a paradise, but on May 11, 1943, this peaceful island was the site of a fierce battle. Here, 11,000 American soldiers faced Japanese troops and the brutal elements of this mysterious landscape. This mission would test their endurance and resilience in ways they'd never imagined.
A garrison of maybe 3,000 Japanese. Instead, they had to fight Attu. They had no way to run supply lines, and so they had long lines of hundreds of men who would have to pass gear up from man to man to move it up the mountain.
Major General Albert E. Brown thought it would take only 3 days to reclaim the island from Japanese occupation, but it takes 3 long weeks to complete the task. Now you can imagine facing entrenched Japanese soldiers. The American troops had to deal with a determined enemy and harsh freezing conditions. They navigated treacherous terrain and blinding snowstorms, all while carrying heavy equipment. The Japanese had fortified Attu with hidden bunkers and sniper positions. The initial assault met fierce resistance, leading to brutal close-quarters combat. Despite these challenges, the Americans persevered, pushing the Japanese back. In the end, Japanese launched a final desperate banzai charge, but it was repelled. By May 30, 1943, the island was secured, though at a high cost, nearly 4,000 American casualties. The Japanese forces were nearly annihilated, with only a handful of prisoners taken. The Battle of Chipyong-ni, 1951. The Battle of Chipyong-ni was a pivotal moment in the Korean War. American and French forces found themselves surrounded by 25,000 Chinese troops. Just like the Battle of Attu, the freezing cold, with snow covering the ground, the defenders faced waves of Chinese attacks. The battle turned into a series of intense close-quarters engagements, with both sides fighting fiercely for control of the village and the surrounding hills.
I was with 2nd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, and we were sent into the front line in February of 1951. It was very cold. It was probably 30 below zero. cold wind from Siberia blowing in.
Despite being outnumbered and low on supplies, the American and French troops held their ground. They used every available resource from artillery and airstrikes to hand-to-hand combat to repel the relentless Chinese assaults. The situation was dire, but the determination and courage of the defenders never wavered.
70 black American soldiers, and they were scattered all over the field. They were mostly naked. They were bayoneted. There was blood pouring all over. They had been machine gunned. Apparently they had fallen asleep the night before, and the Chinese had snuck up on them and just killed them all in their sleeping bags. That was Korea. That was the war. Like there was always a smell of death. There was always bodies laying all over.
Reinforcements eventually broke through the Chinese lines, bringing much-needed supplies and support. By February 15, 1951, the battle was over. The defenders had held the Chipyong-ni, inflicting heavy casualties on the Chinese forces. This hard-fought victory demonstrated the resolve and fighting spirit of the United Nations forces and marked a significant turning point in the Korean War. Next, we move from the snowy battlefields of Korea to the humid jungles of Vietnam, where another intense and often overlooked battle took place. Battle of Hamburger Hill, 1969.
American troops in Vietnam have been fighting bitterly for 9 days to take a position known as Hamburger Hill.
A name that sounds more like a cheesy diner special than one of the Vietnam War's most brutal battles. The fight for Hill 937, which we'll call Hamburger Hill because who wouldn't love a good metaphor, began on May 10, 1969. The U.S. Army, feeling like they needed a little more excitement in their lives, decided to storm this heavily fortified hill in the A Shau Valley. Imagine climbing a steep, muddy hill while getting pelted with enemy fire. That's basically what American troops faced as they charged up this jungle-covered fortress, trying to take it from North Vietnamese forces who weren't exactly in the mood for sharing. The battle was like a never-ending game of who can survive the most pain, with fierce close-quarters combat, endless artillery barrages, and heavy losses on both sides. Hamburger Hill became the ultimate test of endurance. By May 20th, the hill was finally captured, but at a high cost. Over 400 American casualties and a whole lot of controversy about whether the hill was worth the bloodshed. So what's next in our series of unbelievable historical events? Stick around as we explore the invasion of Grenada, 1983. Ever wondered what happened when a beautiful island paradise turned into a high-stakes battlefield? Invasion of Grenada was an operation so tense, even the palm trees were sweating.
This morning, forces from 6 Caribbean democracies and the United States began a landing or landings on the island of Grenada in the Eastern Caribbean.
On October 25, 1983, the U.S. decided Grenada needed a little more excitement. They launched Operation Urgent Fury, which sounds like a name for a really intense workout, but was actually a military mission. The aim? To kick out the Marxist government of Prime Minister Maurice Bishop and restore order, or at least a less chaotic beach party. American forces, including Army Rangers and Marines, parachuted in and went full Rambo on the island. They faced off against a much smaller force of Grenadian soldiers and Cuban advisors who probably weren't expecting their vacation to include heavy combat. The battle had everything: intense urban skirmishes, jungle warfare, and an unexpected dose of tropical heat. In less than 2 weeks, the U.S. had the island back under control, proving that when it comes to military operations, they don't do anything by halves, even if it means turning a paradise into a war zone. So what's next in our series? Grab your popcorn, because we're diving into the Battle of Cantigny, 1991. January 29, 1991, Cantigny, a quiet Saudi Arabian town, had its peaceful vibes completely upended when Iraqi forces decided to crash the party with a surprise attack. Imagine the scene. One moment it's a sleepy desert town, and the next, it's transformed into a full-on combat zone with tanks, jeeps, and more action than a Hollywood blockbuster. The coalition forces, US, Saudi, and their allies, responded like they were auditioning for an action movie. Tanks rolled through the streets, planes streaked through the sky, and soldiers fought tooth and nail in a battle that could have made for some seriously intense reality TV. After a few days of intense fighting, the coalition kicked the Iraqis out of Cantigny and restored order. It was a dramatic introduction to the Gulf War, showing that even the quietest places can turn into epic battlefields when the stakes are high. The The Battle of Tora Bora, 2001. Imagine a rugged mountain range where every crag and crevice comes from a hiding spot in a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek. The Battle of Tora Bora wasn't just a chase, it was a high-altitude showdown. December 2001, the Tora Bora Mountains in Afghanistan, beautiful but treacherous, like the ultimate hide-and-seek playground. This was the stage for one of the most intense battles in the hunt for Osama bin Laden. After the fall of the Taliban, U.S. and Allied forces zeroed in on these mountainous caves, hoping to catch the elusive al-Qaeda leader. Think of it as a giant game of cat and mouse, but instead of mice, these were heavily armed fighters, and instead of a cat, they were a coalition of troops determined to end the chase. The battle was a grueling mix of fierce combat and rugged terrain, with soldiers battling not just the enemy, but the unforgiving landscape itself. Despite the intense effort, bin Laden and many of his followers managed to slip through the mountain passes, leaving the coalition with a bitter taste of near success. The Battle of Tora Bora was a dramatic and difficult chapter in the fight against terrorism. And that's it for today. History's hidden battles remind us that courage and sacrifice come in many forms. Thanks for exploring these forgotten stories with Invictus. If you enjoyed this journey, leave a comment below and subscribe for more untold tales. See you next time.